Muito boa tarde, sejam bem-vindos mais uma vez. Vamos retomar os trabalhos neste Fujitsu World Tour, agora com o keynote sobre Building Next Generation Digital Business Ecosystems. Chama palco, I'd like to welcome on stage Dr. Ian Thomas, Chief Strategy Officer, Fujitsu RunMyProcess.
Wow, that was quite a long walk with everybody watching. I just wanted to let you know, so we just had lunch. I hope everybody is happy and full and satisfied. But you know what happens after lunch, right? You know, whenever you're giving a talk after lunch, it's always like the worst time to do it. So you may have noticed on the way in that there's some cameras up on the balcony. And what we're doing is we're filming everyone, and we've got an artificial intelligence that is basically looking for signs of people falling asleep. And if you fall asleep, a light will come on above your head and light you up so that everyone can see. Okay, so you want to be careful of that. Okay, so when I was asked to come and talk here today, my colleague said to me, don't talk about products, don't talk about surveys, don't talk about market trends, don't talk about practical lessons of technology. So talk about an idea. Tell us about an idea. He said, our customers are so clever that they don't care about products, they're not interested in technology. They want to hear an idea, something new, which is a great, that's brilliant. I'm very happy to be here in Lisbon to talk to you today. But what was going to be my idea? That's obviously a big thing to ask. So what I want to talk about today really is the way in which digitization, the way in which connectivity is offering opportunities to build new kinds of business models, to really look at moving away from models of ownership and control towards ownership, towards models more of partnership and co-creation, something that we're very passionate about within Fujitsu. And this is a story that I've been on for a while. And what I really wanted to do is sort of step back a little bit from all of the technology, all of the buzzwords, and really look at the trends behind these things. What are the forces that are acting on us economically, socially? They're going to force us to think about the way we create value differently. Now, the other interesting side effect of this is that I always do this, but whenever I get asked to speak, I end up creating a brand new presentation. And this time I didn't have much choice, given that somebody said, please present an idea. So this is going to be just as unfamiliar to me as I'm presenting as it is to you. So I'm probably going to learn a little bit along the way as well. So I just wanted to, just check that works. There we are, perfect. So I just wanted to start by telling you a little story about our subsidiary and sort of the journey that we've been on over the last few years, because it is relevant to the bigger picture that I'm going to paint. And really, RunMyProcess is an innovation subsidiary of Fujitsu's platform software business, which is a $1 billion software business headquartered in Tokyo. And its role within the group is to essentially build mission-critical technologies for Fujitsu to use in helping its customers to build new business systems. Now, RunMyProcess itself is basically a technology that helps you to build connected applications and services very quickly. Kind of a role that's very important in Fujitsu's wider vision of co-creating value in new distributed ecosystems. And since the acquisition, we've been fortunate enough to work with our colleagues around the world. We've kind of delivered solutions for lots of different customers in different geographies and learned a lot from each other. Now, at the time of the acquisition, RunMyProcess was actually headquartered in Paris, in France. And if you look at this picture, I guess you would think this might be the Eiffel Tower. It's a reasonable kind of conclusion to draw. But in fact, this is actually the Tokyo Tower in Japan. And I found it quite a nice metaphor for the journey we've been on over the last few years, because this was built by a Japanese architect who looked outside of Japan for inspiration. He looked to Europe, he saw the Eiffel Tower, he kind of imported the engineering, the design flair, but then he added a load of Japanese structural engineering, so it looks a little bit different. But in Tokyo, they have earthquakes quite frequently, so they have to take care that people who climb all the way to the top, as I did one day, are not going to be killed if there's a sudden earthquake. And so really that combination of design, of kind of futurity, of engineering, kind of combining that across geographies, looking outside of your traditional boundaries for where you can find ideas and inspiration, was an interesting analogy for what's happened in our case where even though Fujitsu has an amazing R&D capability, we're amongst the best in the world, we have some of the most talented engineers, but today, with all of the connectivity that exists, with all of the digitization, everybody has to look beyond their boundaries, and we had to look beyond our own R&D capabilities and look for help, look for talent, look for technology in other areas of the world and in other areas than perhaps we'd worked on before. So I think it's a nice kind of analogy for a lot of the things I'm going to talk about today in terms of the way that we are acting on our message of co-creation to transform ourselves. Okay. So I can't really start a discussion about new business models without talking about digital transformation. And honestly, I am absolutely sick of digital transformation. I'm sick of it. I've heard it so many times. I hate the phrase. I hate the emptiness. All of it. It's just become a marketing phrase. And I think that the problem is that a few years ago, this was a concept, something that people who were thinking deeply about the future of the economy could use to put a number of concepts into a bucket and reason about it, But it's really just become a marketing term. People put digital in front of everything, and that's not really helping us to understand what digital is. And I mean, in some cases, how could you argue? If you put digital in front of an ERP system, well, yeah, it is software. If you put digital in front of a mobile, yeah, okay, that's digital. But it's not really telling you anything about what the impact of that is from a business and an economic sense. I think even worse than that, people have started to talk very loosely about transformation. I mean, transformation is a very important and a very critical thing. It's not something that you can take lightly. But when you read things these days, when you look at advertising, when you read on the web, even something as simple as upgrading my laptop seems to be classed as a transformation these days. And I have to look in my dictionary. I don't think that can be right. And so when you think about transformation, I mean, one of the reasons I chose this image is that caterpillars transform into butterflies. That's something quite fundamental. They go from something that walks on the ground to be something that flies in the air with wings. And you can't become a butterfly simply by giving a mobile phone to a caterpillar. And it doesn't really matter how much data you collect about them. And even if you put AI on it, it's not going to make them fly. So really, transformation, if we're going to be serious about this, we have to think about what are we transforming into. It's not enough to just say digital, 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 transformation, transformation, transformation. So there are really 3 points that I wanted to talk about today. The first one is, what is digital really? I mean, digital is a word, it's kind of, it's a phrase that people use, but what are the forces behind digital? What are the things that are making the economy work differently that we capture with this word digital? There are lots of surveys, there are lots of, buzzwords, there are lots of best practices. You can read hundreds and hundreds of thousands of words about digital, but somehow they're all about the what and the how. They're all about have these cultural traits, use this technology, implement these processes. They're not really telling you why. Why is this important? So the second thing I want to talk about after that is to really say, well, if a caterpillar turns into a butterfly, what do we need to turn into? Having understand what digital means, what's the effect of that? What do we need to become to thrive in that environment? And then the third thing I want to talk about, just to finish really, is what kind of depth of transformation is this really? Because transformation, it is a really important word, and we need to think more deeply about what transformation means in this context and the kinds of things we need to do. And I also need to go much quicker because even with the extra time I've been allowed, I'm not going to finish. Okay, so let's get started with this kind of question. What does digital really mean? Now, I'm quite a simple-minded person. And honestly, for me, digitization starts and ends with more connectivity. And when I talk about connectivity, I don't mean network connections, I don't mean IT, I mean connectivity in a historic sense. So, you go back thousands of years, the Romans built a vast empire on the back of building roads, connecting places together, enabling them to move around faster, to move goods, to move armies. Maybe the British Empire, the biggest political and trade empire ever seen, was all built on the connectivity of the seas. The British basically ruled the seas, and that allowed them to connect places much faster than anyone else. You come forward kind of closer to the modern world, the whole Industrial Revolution was basically, it couldn't have happened without railways. You needed ways of getting raw materials to factories, and you needed ways of getting finished goods out of the factories and into the economy. And even more recently, if you look at things like containerization, so multimodal shipping, that's enabled countries in the Far East, like Japan, like China, like Taiwan. They've all become economic powerhouses through this ability to take things that are produced in one place and connect them to other places. I mean, effectively, manufacturing supply chains today are incredibly complex. You're building on top of potentially thousands of specialized components provided by lots of people and then assembled into a final product or service for the customer. Now, and that's something that wouldn't be possible without connectivity. So why is that? It's effectively because connectivity enables networks, and networks mean that you can specialize more because you have many buyers of your goods. You can build economies of scale because lots of different people are buying the thing that you have. But most importantly, it enables what's called combinatorial innovation. Effectively, by having hundreds or thousands of different items, you can combine them in an exponential number of ways to create new value, to combine things. It's invention through combination rather than by creating something brand new. And connectivity also has another interesting aspect, which is the way in which we construct our businesses today is largely a factor of connectivity in itself. So about 50 years ago, the economist Ronald Coase, an Englishman, observed an effect whereby if something was cheaper to do outside in the market, then you would outsource more. And if things are cheaper to do inside the organization, then you would insource more. It sounds fairly simple, but it underpins a whole kind of class of economics now called transaction theory. And effectively, as we increase connectivity, as we make it easier to find things to buy on the open market, to contract with people, to manage those relationships once we've built them, we tend to outsource more. So if you think about it, over the last 100 years, we've seen a big trend towards organizations moving from being vertically integrated to being much more specialized. 100 years ago, Ford owned rubber plantations, they owned iron mines, they owned railways, they owned the whole supply chain that they needed to get their products to market. And nobody does that anymore, because connectivity through airplanes, through containerization, telephones, computers, all of these things have made it easier to deal with other people. They've lowered the costs of buying things from outside of your organization. And really, the internet came along, and it really drove that cost even lower. So today, it's just as easy to start emailing people in China or in Taiwan or anywhere in the world, sending them specifications, collaborating with them through social networks, getting things shipped from one location to another. There's no real reason why the person that you're working with has to be over the hall rather than over the ocean. And so that's one of the key ideas I wanted to kind of convey to you today is that connectivity really is a world-changing thing. To me, it's one of the fundamental things that leads to transformations. Every time we have more connectivity, we transform the way we do things. And really, to me, digital is really the web. I mean, the web arrived, and all of a sudden, we can connect things in a digital medium. So we're not talking about connecting physical things anymore, shipping components between factories, kind of moving people around. We're talking about the ability to integrate bytes rather than atoms. And the web, when it first arrived, it was like this big splash that got dropped into the economy. It's like, here is the internet. The web really democratized it. And since then, we've seen the ripples kind of following on from that big splash as the web branches out further and further into the real economy, through social networks, through Internet of Things, through blockchain, all of these things, they're basically taking the web further and further into the economy. And as it does that, it's increasing the potential for connectivity. And as we increase the potential for connectivity, we increase the potential for changing the way that we create value. So I guess, the first generation of the web was largely about online transactions, sharing information, and already that was a pretty powerful transformative effect. When you look at the kinds of offerings that we're talking about today, when we look at the way that we interact with our banks, we do our shopping, you would say that's been a pretty big change. And the second wave of the web was really all about, mobility, making computing available on the web through cloud, looking at social networks so that people could connect to each other more easily. Effectively, this has allowed people to share ideas very quickly, so basically use social networks to generate ideas, implement them in hours or days using the cloud, and then distribute them to potentially billions of people immediately through mobile devices. I mean, it's already an incredible amount of connectivity. And that has really produced some really big disruptions. So people talk about an Uber or an Airbnb or all of these kind of companies that have ridden this second wave of the web. And maybe they have been quite disruptive, but for me, it's still only the very earliest stages of the way that this kind of digital technology is penetrating out into the economy. The third wave, which has been a long time in coming, but is really starting to gather pace now, is going to bring literally billions of objects onto this World Wide Web. It's going to allow us to connect to things in the real world. So we're no longer just talking about sharing information. We're talking about the fact that this room, all of your devices, our cars, our homes, our factories, all of those things are going to be able to share information both with each other and with people over the web. And one interesting statistic I saw recently is that that also means that machines will be the primary consumer of services provided by other machines for the first time. We're basically taking the addressable market for computing beyond the number of people in the world. It's kind of quite incredible, really. I mean, behind that, you've also got super interesting things like blockchain, which are going to provide a trust infrastructure that enables all of these connections, all of these people, all of these machines, all of these systems to work together, to contract automatically, to work together in a way that can be completely trusted, without any intermediaries, without any delays. It's basically going to facilitate even more of this connectivity happening automatically. And interestingly, the other thing about blockchain is hopefully that will start to democratize some of the ways that wealth is created as well, because anybody can participate in these kinds of networks. They're open, they're permissionless. Anybody can become involved in networks built on blockchain and participate their value and be rewarded for it. And that's going to be hugely disruptive. It's really taking the idea of outsourcing from things that are relatively big because of the costs of managing it down even to an individual person. And then behind all of this, we've really got AI. So AI is a very hyped topic at the moment. And what I think is going to be its most important use, when we talk a lot at the moment about automation, about displacement of people out of jobs, and those things are very important to consider, but they're really just talking about how we do everything exactly the same as we've always done it, but we replace a person with a robot. Okay, maybe that increases efficiency, it reduces cost, it makes things a bit faster. But it's not really fundamentally using this technology to change the nature of what's possible. And I think this is where AI is really going to be most interesting, is if you imagine that we're now able to build a business model that connects together potentially millions of different assets and resources, all of which are communicating in real time, kind of coordinating with each other, how could you possibly manage that? Our brains are just not capable of processing all of that data, of processing all of that information. So we're going to need machine assistants to help us to make this new connected environment tractable and actually to create value with it. And so, I think that on the one side, we do have worries about how AI is going to displace people, but on the other, to me, when you think about the traveling salesman problem this morning, with 28 locations, you had 5 billion, gazillion, trillion, million, billion numbers or combinations. If we've suddenly got millions and billions of things connected to the web, think of the exponential number of possible connections there. And the amount of value we'll be able to create out of that is so much greater than what we can create today that I think there'll be plenty for everyone to do, to be honest. Okay, but at every step of this process, really, all the way from the left to the right, effectively the process is the same. We're just connecting things to the web. The web is basically the core of this disruption. And more digitally connected assets means more opportunity to combine them in different ways and create new business models. Okay, did that move? It did not move. Okay, so the second thing I just wanted to talk about was what does it mean to be digital? So in this kind of environment, what do you need to be a digitally native company? So probably the most important aspect of this huge increase in connectivity is that it's making it easier than ever to externalize resources. You don't need to own things anymore. And this has really resulted in new organizations with exponential business models, exponential growth rates. They're no longer acquiring assets as a way of growing. They're basically focusing on value to their users and then looking outside their organization for all of the different assets and resources they can connect to deliver that as efficiently as possible. Connecting people, connecting systems, connecting physical assets, all of these things together in service of their users. And really, these companies have been able to scale not only because of all of that, but because they don't even need to own the physical infrastructure necessary to make their business operate. They can use cloud platforms, even ones like the RunMyProcess company that I'm talking about, which allow you to just really connect all of these resources together at internet scale, push a button, see if your business model works or not. That's hugely transformative. And so, your value ceases to be defined by how many people you have, how many assets you own, and becomes defined by what your users receive, the quality of the service they get, whether you're meeting their needs, combined with the total network of people you're working with to deliver that value. So it all becomes about soft IP, such as software, about brand, everything to do with how you build and coordinate this network to satisfy your users. And if you look at companies like so I mentioned Uber and Airbnb. So, Uber today is a transportation company that has no drivers and has no cars, and yet it's worth more than General Motors. Airbnb, hospitality company with no hotels and no hospitality staff, worth more than Hilton and Hyatt combined. And when you ask why that is, how can something that owns nothing be worth so much? It's essentially because they are meeting their needs better than traditional companies. And the value is in the network. It's not in the ownership of the things. It's the way that you connect all of these things together to meet a need better than anyone else that is where the value is. And people can see that. And so while a lot of these organizations are sort of first-generation outliers, they teach us an important lesson about digital, which is that the future is not about acquiring assets and managing them. That makes you a linear business. If you have to acquire people, acquire machinery, acquire assets in order to be able to grow, then you are a linear business. You can only grow as fast as you can kind of acquire and manage those things, including making your organization more and more complex as you deepen your hierarchy to gain control over all of it. On the other hand, these other companies have got exponential business models. Basically, because all of their assets are externalized, they can go from a very small to very large just by using all of these external pools of things that are available already. So they're almost infinitely scalable in terms of their business model and their revenue. And that's kind of like hugely disruptive. We talk about digital transformation. People talk about automation, they talk about RPA, they talk about mobility. But let's be real here. If you step back and say that organizations can now create exponentially scalable business models today by using connectivity to connect resources together, that is something fundamentally different. That is not just applying technology to what we already do. And so to be able to do this, if we look at the differences between a traditional business and this kind of new connected business. Actually, yeah, I forgot to mention, so we call these composite businesses just because it's kind of meant to represent the idea that, as with composite materials, you take independent pieces, independent materials that have particular properties, and really by combining them, by weaving them together, you create something that's much stronger than any of the individual parts could support. And we see the same with organizations now. We see businesses weaving together lots of independent pieces to create stronger business models than any one of them could do on their own. And so kind of the problem is that, traditional businesses are really machines to maximize efficiency. Hierarchical business models have been amazingly successful in marshalling and managing resources to produce things at scale. But there are two problems, really, with this kind of model once you are into a more connected environment. The first thing is that as you scale your hierarchy, inevitably, the people who make things get further away from the people who buy them. It's not possible to have teams both making and selling items. And so all of a sudden, they're cut off from their customers. They don't really know what the market wants. You have to take guesses. The second thing is that as hierarchies get deeper, power and kind of responsibility moves upwards. So all of a sudden, you get to the position where the people who are most operationally capable of knowing what needs to be done are disempowered. They can't make decisions. And the people who have to make the decisions, the people with all of the money and the power, are too far away to know what the right decision is. And so you have these messages flowing up and down this hierarchy that just slows everything down, and often ends up with products that customers don't want, changed in a time scale that's completely inappropriate. And so, while hierarchies have been immensely successful in a kind of an analog world where things are stable, where you don't need to change things frequently, they're not really fit for purpose for this much faster, connected world where there's so much data and change flowing around. And so really and the other thing is, today, all of this digital technology that's in the hands of our users, which is only going to increase as we move more into IoT, means that we're moving from an economy where we have customers, we think about customers as a kind of a group, and we build standard products to ship to them, to an economy where we have relationships with every individual that uses our products and services. We're literally moving from a customer economy to a user economy. We will know everybody. We'll have a relationship with everyone. And so that means it's an experience economy. We need to think about it differently. And so, sorry, I just lost my thread a little bit there. Yeah. So the challenge of that is that today technology is giving us the ability to understand the needs of every user in real time, to be able to analyze that and to be able to act on it, but our organizations are not structured to allow that. The decision-making processes are too slow. The people who can see the information are not empowered to make the change that's necessary to meet those users' needs as quickly as they would like. So really, to understand the needs of your users and to be able to respond more quickly, you have to turn the organization upside down. You have to turn the hierarchy the other way up. You need to put as many self-directed teams as possible in front of users, allow them to deeply kind of connect to those user communities so that they can see the data, they're able to change things and adapt the products and services quickly. And then the rest of the business really becomes a platform to try and make those people successful. It provides money, it provides resources, it provides distribution channels. And those self-directed teams then, they just basically use their relationship with their customers to decide what to build, to go out, look for people to work with within the organization and outside the organization, and build a kind of a value network that delivers that value to the customer in the most efficient and effective way. The only thing that counts really in this new market is, are you meeting a user's need profitably, and sustainably? If you are, then it doesn't really matter. You just need to empower people to do that. And so one of the most important decisions these days, really, for organizations is whether they want to work with their doors sort of open or closed, really. Traditional organizations tend to work with closed doors, so they have definite constraints in terms of people and assets and capacity. But these sort of new composite businesses, they really strive to work with open doors. They focus on the user value. They open their doors to the users, they get to know them, they connect to them deeply, but they also open their doors to the outside world in terms of pulling innovation into their network and delivering that value as effectively as possible. So again, this is quite a substantial change. We're going from a place where what we did was relatively stable, we didn't know our users that well, everything was controlled centrally, to a situation where we have potentially hundreds of micro-enterprises within an organization facing off to individual user groups and building value in co-creation networks together with external participants. And that is going to be far more efficient, far more profitable, far more useful than what we could do if we continue to try to deliver in the way that we do today. Okay, so the third area I just wanted to talk about, I don't know why I'm looking at my watch, because there's a clock here. The third area I really wanted to talk about was, well, given that connectivity is such a force for change, given that we need to think differently about how we organize and create value, what does that mean in terms of transformation for those of us who are sitting today in a traditional organization? And I think the first thing, the analogy I like to give really is that it's really easy to get distracted by all of the changes that are happening in the world at any one time. So there are so many buzzwords at the moment. We talk about co-creation. There is talk about digital. There's talk about transformation. You've got AI. You've got blockchain, mobility. All of these things. They're all distractions. But there are some changes that are so significant that they are like changes in climate. They're changes in the environment in which we operate. They're not something that we can ignore. And so climate change is a good kind of analogy for that in the real world. Why is climate change a problem? It's a problem because as sea levels rise, as certain parts of the world become affected by drought, we can't live there anymore. Do you know what I mean? It's just either we can't live there, or we have to so fundamentally change our way of living that, it's not the same as it was before. We literally have to adapt to survive. And it's kind of, digitization to me can be thought of as a kind of, as like a climate change. We're moving from a situation in which we could pretty much control our own destiny to one where the environment around us is changing. We have to adapt to survive. Being well adapted for an environment where change happens slowly, where you can win by being efficient on processes, to an environment where you have to change quickly, you have to be much more deeply connected, you have to work in networks with people. They're two different environments. You have to transform. There's no kind of easy way of avoiding that. But I think part of the challenge that I see when I kind of talk to people is that many companies haven't really understood this yet. They still think that they can become digital by maybe applying some technologies to their existing processes or their existing operations, or even worse, they can, well, not worse, maybe slightly better, or they can just basically put some digital touch points around their existing business operations just to make it more convenient, a little bit more sticky for customers. Sort of putting lipstick on a pig, if that means I don't know if that means anything in Portugal. We don't do that in the UK, by the way. Just we don't go around putting lipstick on pigs. It's just something we say. I guess the meaning is fairly clear. So the real driver here is that we have to adapt to the environment. If we exist in a world of small teams, highly interconnected with other teams and technology, working together to deliver business value, we can't be a black box in that environment. We can't just sit there feeling like we can control the amount of change that we have to make. The environment is acting on us far more than our ability to control the environment. I mean, it's the same, it's the old story about King Canute. Yeah, okay, he can sit on the beach and he can try and hold back the waters, but I don't think that worked out so well. So we really have to engage with this. We can't ignore it. We have to think about what does it mean for my organization to exist in a world of high connectivity, of self-directed teams, of value creation networks, where I've externalized a lot of the resources, and the most valuable things I have are my relationship to the customer and the network of people that I work with to deliver that value better than anyone else. And so when we talk to customers, when I talk to customers, we sort of see people who are almost looking at three different levels when they think about digital transformation, so kind of like different levels of maturity in their thinking about digitization. And at the first level, you see people who really view digital technology as a way to automate things. They're not really looking at how do I use this to transform. They're looking at, I've got processes with silos in there. I have too many people, I'd like less people. I'd like to get more insight, to make my processes, my decision-making better. They're really internally focused, no change to the business model, no change to the operations, just how do I use this technology to be more effective and more efficient. And it's not really a technology thing, because a lot of these people are some of the smartest people I know. They're looking at robotic process automation. They're looking at how they use AI to automate decisions. They're looking at things like blockchain to streamline collaborations across organizations. They're looking at things like IoT to understand how they can get more contextual awareness into their processes. It's really just a matter of intent. Their intent is to make what they do today more efficient. And that's one level. And that, you can't believe how much value there is in that. If you look at any kind of traditional organization, I'm sure you're all aware that there is so much waste and inefficiency that even just connecting what you already do can yield immense value. But it's not transformation. That is not digital transformation. It's just automating what you already do. Now, there's a second level of people that we talk to who really focus on the external relationships. So they're not really thinking about how they change their internal organization. They're really thinking about how do I deliver new experiences to my customers. They see the Ubers, the Airbnbs, the Amazons, the Googles, and they say, well, I have to be able to provide a competitive experience to my customer in order to keep up with the market. So these guys, they're looking at mobility, they're looking at making better online services available. They're looking at voice recognition, kind of intelligent assistants. For all of these things, the intent, once again, is really to improve the way that they interact with their users. Now, some of them are sort of pulling that a little bit back in, and they're saying, well, how can we connect those experiences to our existing organization more successfully? You know, these are the people in the kind of the bimodal, the fast IT, the slow IT world. They're almost trying to say, I want to keep the bulk of my organization the same and just layer digital technologies around the outside to protect my internals from any change. And to be honest, even that is a nightmare. You know? So I've seen very few organizations who are managing to kind of put this wrapper around the outside and connect it to their existing systems, because part of the problem is those internal systems have not been built to be connected to things outside of the organization, either up towards consumers or downwards towards their suppliers. And then there's a third group, really, which is absolutely tiny at the moment, to be honest. So we're having some discussions with some people, and this is where a lot of the co-creation discussions happen. And these people are saying, look, I understand all of this thing about connectivity. I understand about I need to transform my business model. I need to become more responsive to my customers, more deeply connected. You know, but I need help to do that. And really what these people tend to do is they start at the edge of the organization, so they're focused on their users, because if you're not focused on your users, anything you do to transform is going to be a waste of time. So they're focused on their users, and then they're working their way back into the organization, creating small teams that together are building a value chain to deliver that new digital experience to customers. Now, some of them are doing it kind of incrementally, create a customer-focused team, allow them to start finding other teams within the organization, people outside, to build out that value. Some of them operate kind of entrepreneurship programs, you know, so it's kind of innovation and entrepreneurship, try and encourage their employees to set up new business models alongside the existing ones. And some of them, you know, kind of look to set up new businesses alongside their existing one and start from scratch. And any of those things are fine. You know, what works for one company doesn't always work for the other. But I think the important point is, you know, that this environment, you know, it's not enough to automate, and it's also not enough just to try and address your customers digitally. If you're going to succeed, you really have to transform. And that means starting at the edge of the organization with the value that you provide and working backwards through your value chain, understanding, should I be doing this? Is there somebody else who can help me to do it? Can I go faster? Can I get more data? You know, it's really about rethinking the way that you deliver value. Okay. And so you kind of end up in this scenario where you need an environment to collaborate with other people. Our aim really is to help customers to use self-managed, self-directed teams, help them to connect to their user communities more deeply, help them to connect to talent networks, find people outside their organization who can help them to do things better, help them to find an ecosystem of partners. So who can you rely on? Who already has existing components that you can use to build your business model faster or more scalably or more profitably? You know, how do you take this business model that you design with these various people and instantiate it? How do you make it real? How do you generate business logic that is then distributed across all of this new infrastructure that exists in the world, whether that's across your existing systems, in the cloud, IoT? You know, there's a plethora of places where we're going to have to deploy technology to in the near future to be able to take advantage of all of this connectivity. And then finally, how do I govern all of this? How do I make sure that everybody gets their fair share of the wealth that's been created? How do I track what people have done, how they have contributed to this business, you know, and kind of assign the value that's generated for these users as a result of that work? And so the kind of things we're looking at are, you know, how do we help people to create business models, to collaborate with people to fulfill them, to find people who can help them to quickly map out that business model, automated matching, these kinds of things, deployment, and then using AI, as I said earlier, to take control of this on behalf of our customers, because it's a very complicated environment. So we want to use AI to basically make sure that they don't have to care for how to make all this complexity work. But I guess behind all of this, you know, our aim is really to enable a distributed group of people to work together to create profitable business models through co-creation. Okay. So I guess the first thing is that all of these connections that are forming at the moment, you know, across technologies, across businesses, across geographies, you know, they are unleashing huge potential for innovation. You know, there are so many pieces appearing on the web all over the place, new startups, new technologies, new services, you know, that they form a rich ground within which to implement new ways of working, you know, kind of use combinatorial innovation to plug things together and create new business models. But in order to be able to do that, you know, that's moving so quickly that we can't wait for information to flow up and down our traditional hierarchies. We have to empower teams to basically go out there and find that value and connect it wherever it might be across the web. You know, we have to open our doors in order to be able to go fast enough. I think the second thing is, you know, kind of opening our doors means that we have to move away from this sort of traditional model of ownership and control of everything and move into new networks of value together with partners. We want to externalize as many resources as possible in order to make sure that our business models are focused, that they're scalable, and they're as innovative as they can be. And to do that, that means providing the best possible user experiences by combining our own knowledge, our own insights, our own technology with that of other people. You know, this is really where the co-creation part becomes very strong. It's how do we combine business and technology knowledge with others to address users in new and more valuable ways. And kind of all of this really, you know, it's going to require transformation with a capital T. I guess when I started thinking about this talk, I was thinking, well, what can I talk about that's kind of like an idea? What do I want to leave people with? And being told just to talk about an idea gave me quite a lot of freedom, actually, you know, not to worry too much about people's sensibilities or the current world or anything else. And what I realized was that the main thing I want people to leave with is that this is like really disruptive, you know, like I know we try and simplify it, we try and make it safer, we try and make it more kind of secure, but at the end of the day, we cannot stop all of these empowered teams of people who are coming onto the web with all these new assets, creating fundamentally different business models. And I was talking to someone from the press earlier about how disruptive this is, and I remember reading a case study where they said that, you know, maybe 15 years ago, there were 9 major music studios around the world that took 80% of the profits out of the music industry. And when digital, you know, when the digitization of music started to happen, the reaction of those people was to try and hold it back. You know, they went to the law, they went to the courts, they did everything possible to stop it happening and to kind of maintain control of their business models. But now, you know, 15 years later, all of those studios are gone, and 80% of the profits go to Spotify and Apple. You know, and it kind of shows the problem that often, if we don't look beyond our current situation, if we only look at our peers in our industry, all of whom are suffering the same doubts as ourselves, you can get into this herd mentality. You can start looking at everybody else and saying, well, he's not doing anything, or she's not doing anything. We're okay. Our industry is not changing. But, you know, this is a very fast process of evolution, you know. Infrastructures are commoditizing, middleware is commoditizing, applications are commoditizing, and businesses are going to get to that point, you know. All of a sudden, you'll find that it's not one of your competitors who has destroyed you. It is 100 different startups whose value is being combined by a third party to do what you do fundamentally differently. And by the time that happens, it's too late. It's like it's an exponential problem. You know, it'll be 99% of the way there before you see 1% of the risk, and that is something that's deeply troubling, to be honest. And so I guess I wanted to communicate why this change is so fundamental. The fact that it is all about connections. It is all about how connections enable you to do things differently. It is about how you need to operate differently in a connected world. And if you want to operate like that and be successful, you have to transform. There's no way around it. You know, the sea is going to rise. You are going to get droughts. So, you know, you can still sit there with, you know, like cocktails and everything else in the desert, but you won't survive that long. So I guess being fit for this digital age is really going to require new behaviors that reach beyond the fixed boundaries of our existing organizations, you know, where we look to co-create value with other people as much as possible. Okay, so that was quite depressing, but I would say that this is a super exciting time to be alive. I mean, if you think about it, you know, the Industrial Revolution, you know, all of these big changes, they created immense opportunities for everyone. They changed society fundamentally. And the digital one, if you think how many more connections we're going to get from digitization, it's easier to connect things. Information flows faster. It's in real time. There is a wealth of opportunity. We are at the start of like a golden age that can be created through technology. Now, I think we're really, really lucky to be alive. But I also understand that it can be quite a daunting time. And so I suppose our message is that we're focused on creating the technologies that enable people to build their own value networks, but to do that in a kind of a safe and incremental way. We can help you if you just want to automate some stuff at the moment. We can help you with reaching out to your customers better, and we can definitely help you with connecting resources together to start to transform your business model. Because you're going to have to do all three of them simultaneously, because for most people, starting with kind of composition is not an option because you have an existing business, and it's the savings from automation that pay for all of your innovation activities. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say today. I wanted to thank you very much for taking the time to listen to me and for the opportunity to speak. And I wish you good luck with your own transformations. Thank you.